People who married into rich families? Have your in-laws ever tried to drive you out? I was at work when I got the call that my wife was in surgery after being pulled out of a burning car. By the time I got to the hospital, her parents were already there, and the doctors were waiting with a grim expression. They said Carla had suffered severe head trauma, and though she was alive, she wouldn't recognize people for a long time. They let me in to see her, and she was actually awake, but her eyes just looked straight through me. That's when Carla's family stepped in. They'd been looking for a way to get rid of me for years, and saw this as their golden ticket. The first move they made was transferring Carla to Whitmore Medical, the private clinic they donated an entire wing to. Their word was law in that place, and suddenly, the nurses weren't letting me in to see Carla. Every time I showed up, they said she was resting, or in therapy. I had to watch through the window as her mother stroked her hair, smiling at her, making sure she saw her as her caretaker instead of me. I felt invisible and powerless. It took me 2 weeks to sneak into the ward just to see Carla in person. That's when I saw James for the first time. My in-laws had been trying to get Carla to leave me for him for years. He was sitting next to her, laughing and touching her hand. She seemed slightly confused, but accepted his presence because her parents were nodding and smiling, assuring her that this was normal. I tried to walk towards them, but 2 nurses literally pulled me away and informed my in-laws of what I'd done. As days went by, it got worse. One afternoon, I was waiting at the nurses' station, begging for something, when I overheard my father-in-law describing James to Carla. He talked about his family's estate, their shared social circles, and casually mentioned how lucky Carla was to have him as her husband. I felt my stomach drop. I tried to enter the room again, and this time a nurse told me that Carla's family had explicitly banned me from seeing her. I stood frozen, watching Carla talk intimately with James through the glass window, looking comfortable with him, her body language trusting him. To make it even worse, I later found out my in-laws had been arranging romantic dinners with James in the private dining room to help Carla feel normal again. I felt sick, desperate. I snuck into Carla's room one night. When she saw me, she looked confused, but to my surprise, she didn't immediately reject me. I talked to her, recounting memories of our first apartment above the garage, simple moments eating takeout on the floor, and the quiet nights we spent planning our future. Her expression softened, and I could see tiny hints of recognition. But before anything more could happen, security rushed in and escorted me out. The next week was agony. I overheard nurses talking about James bringing Carla flowers daily, holding her hand, and how he'd even kiss her forehead. I realized Carla was genuinely starting to believe James was her husband. It hurt every time I saw her now, confused and uncertain, reflexively reaching for his hand instead of mine. But I refused to give up. I tried again, this time during a shift change. I reminded Carla of our wedding, how we'd gotten married at the courthouse because her parents refused to pay for anything, how she'd held me when my dad died. She listened closely. She didn't have some sudden moment of clarity, but she seemed genuinely troubled when security asked me to leave again. Over the next few months, I saw Carla start to piece it together slowly. She'd ask James casual questions about their supposed past, small stuff about their first date or how he proposed, things he clearly had been coached on, but sometimes contradicted himself. That caused Carla to withdraw from him. Eventually, she asked one of the nurses to show her admission forms. When she saw James's name listed as emergency contact instead of mine, something clicked. 2 days later, she quietly asked to see me. Her family didn't know at first, but when they found out, they exploded. Her mother stormed into the room just as Carla was holding my hand, and she froze. She immediately snapped at the nurse, ordering them to call security, but Carla held my wrist tight. For the first time since her accident, Carla looked directly at her mother and told her firmly that she knew exactly who her husband was. The room went silent. Her mother went pale, and her father looked furious. James stood awkwardly to the side, embarrassed and humiliated, quickly walking out. Carla, calmly but sternly, told her family they'd taken advantage of her condition, manipulated her, and hurt the one person she truly loved. She told them to leave immediately, but her mother had no intention of doing so. She stood there in the doorway, her face turning from white to red, like someone had slapped her, and she took a step forward into the room. She started saying Carla was confused and needed rest, that the trauma was making her say things she didn't mean, but Carla's fingers wrapped tighter around mine. Her mother reached for the call button on the wall and pressed it 3 times, hard, while staring at me like I was something she'd stepped in. The tension in that room felt like it was about to explode. Within minutes, 2 security guards showed up, both big guys I'd seen around the hospital before, and Carla's mother pointed at me and told them I was disturbing a patient who needed medical attention. But Carla sat up straighter in bed and told them clearly that I was her husband and she wanted me there. The guards looked at each other, then at Carla's mother, then back at Carla, clearly not sure what to do since the donor family usually got whatever they wanted in this place. One guard stepped forward but stopped when Carla said my name and asked me to stay. The hospital administrator showed up about 10 minutes later, a woman in her 50s wearing a dark blue suit who I'd seen in the hallways before. She looked really uncomfortable as she took in the scene, with Carla holding my hand, her parents standing by the door looking mad, and the security guards waiting for instructions. She suggested we all step outside to discuss this calmly in her office, but Carla wouldn't let go of my hand and said anything that needed to be said could be said right there. Her mother's jaw got tight when she realized she was losing control of what was happening. That's when Carla's father pulled out his phone and started making calls right there in the room. I could hear him talking to someone about the wing they'd donated, their years of support for the hospital, and demanding immediate action about the situation in his daughter's room. He was pacing back and forth, his voice getting louder with each call, mentioning board members by name and reminding them about fundraising events. But Carla told him to stop, her voice stronger than I'd heard it since the accident, and he actually paused mid-sentence to stare at her. The administrator cleared her throat and explained that regardless of any donations or support, the hospital had to respect patient wishes if the patient was mentally competent to make decisions. Carla's mother jumped on that immediately, saying the head trauma made Carla incapable of making any decisions and that they needed to protect her from herself. The administrator said they would need to do a formal evaluation to determine Carla's mental capacity, and Carla's mother nodded like she'd already won. Over the next 2 days, a psychologist came to evaluate Carla while her parents sat in chairs near the door, watching everything. Carla answered questions about what year it was, who the president was, and did math problems in her head. She explained her daily routine before the accident, showed she could follow complex instructions, and clearly stated what she wanted regarding visitors and medical decisions. The psychologist wrote notes the whole time, asking follow-up questions about Carla's memories and checking if she understood the consequences of her choices. Her parents kept trying to interrupt, pointing out when Carla couldn't remember something specific, but the psychologist told them to let Carla answer for herself. At the end of the second day, the psychologist said that while Carla had some memory gaps from the trauma, she was generally competent to make her own decisions. Her parents' lawyer showed up the next morning with a folder full of documents, including power of attorney papers from before the accident that Carla had apparently signed years ago. But I pulled out our marriage certificate and explained that spouses have priority in medical decisions unless there's a specific legal document saying otherwise. The lawyer started arguing about technicalities and dates, pulling out more papers and pointing to different sections, while Carla watched from her bed, getting more and more upset with each argument. That's when Valerie Palmer from Patient Advocacy got involved after a nurse had quietly reported what was happening. She was a tall woman with gray hair who carried herself like she meant business, and she started documenting every time Carla's parents had restricted my access and every instance where they'd overridden what Carla said she wanted. She interviewed nurses, looked at visitor logs, and took photos of the sign-in sheets that showed all the times I'd been turned away. The staff started being more careful around her, actually listening when Carla said something instead of automatically looking to her parents for approval. Carla's mother tried a different approach a few days later, sitting on the edge of Carla's bed and talking about all the medical bills they'd been paying. She pulled out statements showing hundreds of thousands of dollars, talking about specialists they'd brought in and experimental treatments they were considering. She kept saying how I could never afford this level of care, that Carla needed their financial support to get better, and without them, she'd end up in some state facility. Carla asked to see the bills herself, taking each statement and reading through the charges, asking questions about specific treatments and why certain doctors had been consulted. During a family meeting with the medical team the following week, things really exploded when Carla's father stood up and accused me of being after the insurance money. He said I'd probably been waiting for something like this to happen, that I saw dollar signs when Carla got hurt, and that I was manipulating a brain-injured woman for financial gain. But Carla spoke up, telling everyone about our life together that her parents had never wanted to know about. She talked about how we'd saved for months to buy our first couch, how I'd worked double shifts to pay for her birthday dinner at a nice restaurant, how we'd planned to start a family once we'd saved enough. Her mother looked stunned, hearing about this whole life they'd ignored because it didn't fit their plans for their daughter. 3 days after that meeting, James sent a message through one of the nurses asking if he could talk to Carla. She agreed, but told the nurse I had to stay in the room. He showed up the next morning wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He sat down across from us and started explaining how Carla's parents had been calling him for months before the accident. They'd told him I was just temporary, and that Carla would come to her senses eventually. He said they promised him she'd love him once she got to know him properly. His hands kept moving while he talked, adjusting his watch, straightening his tie, anything to avoid looking at us directly. Carla just listened without saying anything, her hand holding mine under the blanket. When he finally left, she squeezed my fingers and closed her eyes for a long time. The neuropsychologist came by that afternoon with a clipboard full of papers. She went through all these tests with Carla, asking about dates and names and what she remembered. After an hour of questions, she wrote down that Carla needed consistent caregivers for her recovery. Carla's parents jumped at this immediately, both of them talking over each other about how they could be there every day. But Carla told the doctor she wanted me as her main support person. The neuropsychologist wrote this down in the official file, making it a medical recommendation. Carla's mother's face turned red, but she couldn't argue with the doctor's notes. A week later, my boss called me into his office. He closed the door and asked me to sit down, which never meant anything good. He said he'd been hearing things at the country club about me taking advantage of a sick woman. Someone had told him I was manipulating Carla while she couldn't think straight. I recognized the words immediately because they were exactly what Carla's mother had been saying to anyone who would listen. I spent an hour explaining everything to my boss, showing him photos from our wedding, text messages from before the accident, anything to prove we were really married. He believed me eventually, but warned me to be careful because these rumors were spreading fast. Valerie Palmer found me in the hospital cafeteria the next day. She'd been documenting everything for weeks and had a folder thick with notes. She explained that what Carla's parents were doing violated several patient rights laws. She suggested we get a lawyer who knew medical advocacy cases. She gave me Brooks Pope's business card and said he'd already heard about our situation. I met Brooks in his office downtown 2 days later. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with stacks of medical law books covering every surface. He listened to the whole story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he said he'd take the case pro bono because donor influence like this set a dangerous precedent. He started pulling together documents that same day, requesting visitor logs, medical records, and witness statements. The hospital ethics committee scheduled a hearing for the following week. Carla's parents showed up with 3 lawyers in expensive suits carrying briefcases. The committee members sat at a long table looking uncomfortable before we even started. Brooks had prepared packets for each member showing how many times I'd been denied access despite being Carla's legal spouse. The hearing started at 9 in the morning. Several nurses testified about the instructions they'd received to keep me away from Carla. One nurse, an older woman who'd worked there 20 years, admitted she knew it was wrong but was scared of losing her job. She said the administration made it clear that keeping the donors happy was part of their duty. Another nurse showed text messages from her supervisor telling her to call security whenever I showed up. The committee chair kept writing notes and frowning deeper with each testimony. Carla testified through a video link from her room because her parents' lawyers argued she was too fragile to come to the hearing room. She spoke clearly, telling the committee she wanted me as her main visitor and medical decision-maker. Her mother kept trying to interrupt, standing up and saying Carla didn't understand what she was saying. The committee chair finally threatened to have her removed if she interrupted again. Carla's father's face got darker and darker as Carla kept talking. She explained how confused she'd been when she woke up and how her parents had tried to convince her James was her husband. After 3 hours of testimony, the committee went into a closed session. We waited in the hallway while they discussed everything. Carla's mother paced back and forth in her heels, clicking on the tile floor. Her father made phone calls to board members, his voice getting louder with each call. When the committee came back, they ruled that donors couldn't override patient autonomy or spousal rights. They set up a visitation schedule that guaranteed me daily access to see Carla. Her mother grabbed her purse and stormed out without a word. Her father stayed long enough to tell the committee this wasn't over before following his wife. The next week was strange. Every time I arrived to visit Carla, something would suddenly come up. Medications that had to be given right that moment, urgent tests that couldn't wait, therapy sessions that got moved without notice. Valerie started coming with me and writing down every single incident. She took photos of the schedule changes and kept copies of all the sudden medical orders. After documenting 15 different incidents in 5 days, she said we had clear evidence of continued interference. Brooks contacted Dr. Leona Burks, an independent neurologist who agreed to evaluate Carla. Dr. Burks spent 2 days doing tests and reviewing Carla's medical history. She found that Carla's recovery was actually being slowed down by all the family stress. She recommended transferring Carla to a neutral rehabilitation facility away from Whitmore Medical, where her parents couldn't use their donations to control things. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The next morning, Carla's father called the hospital CEO at home before breakfast. I heard about it from a nurse who overheard the CEO's assistant talking about the threat to pull their $12 million pledge for the new cardiac wing. Within 2 hours, the board called an emergency meeting, and I watched suits file into the conference room while Carla slept. 3 of the board members played golf with her father every Sunday at the country club. They kept shaking their heads when the administrator showed them Dr. Burks's report. The meeting went on for 4 hours with people coming and going. Valerie sat with me in the hallway, taking notes about everything. The administrator came out looking exhausted and told us the board wanted more time to review the situation. That same afternoon, a reporter from Channel 7 showed up asking questions about wealthy donors controlling patient care. Someone from the hospital had leaked the whole story, including copies of the ethics committee ruling. The reporter tried to get a statement from me, but Brooks called and told me to stay quiet while he built our case. Within hours, Carla's parents had hired Sterling Public Relations to handle what they called a family medical matter. The next day, stories started showing up online about my credit card debt from when I was unemployed 2 years ago. Articles mentioned how I'd borrowed money from a coworker and hadn't paid it back yet. They found a photo from my social media showing me at a bar 6 months ago and ran it with headlines about Carla's husband partying while she recovered. My boss called me into his office asking if the stories were true about me trying to get control of Carla's trust fund. 2 coworkers stopped talking to me completely. Another asked if I was really as broke as the articles said. I kept my mouth shut and focused on Carla, who had started physical therapy that week. She could barely stand for 30 seconds without help, but she insisted I be there for every session. The therapist noticed she pushed herself harder when I held her hand. She managed 5 full steps on Tuesday and 8 on Thursday. Her mother stood in the hallway watching through the window, but couldn't come in because Carla had specifically told the staff she didn't want her there. During Friday's session, the therapist brought out photo cards for a memory exercise. Carla picked up our wedding photo from the courthouse steps. She remembered the blue dress she wore and how we ate Chinese food afterward because we couldn't afford a reception. She turned to look at her mother through the window and asked loud enough for everyone to hear why they hadn't come to the wedding. Her mother's face went red, but she couldn't answer through the glass. The therapist wrote down that Carla showed excellent recall of significant life events. That weekend, Brooks filed papers threatening a federal lawsuit for violation of patient autonomy and spousal rights. The hospital's lawyers knew they couldn't win if it went to court. Monday morning, the board voted to approve the transfer, but only after 3 members abstained from voting. Carla's father spent the rest of the day calling each board member personally. I heard him yelling on the phone in the parking lot about ungrateful people forgetting who paid for their new facilities. The transfer got scheduled for the following Thursday. Tuesday morning, Carla's parents' lawyer filed for an emergency injunction to stop the transfer, claiming Carla wasn't competent to make medical decisions. The judge scheduled a hearing for Wednesday afternoon. Brooks brought 3 doctors, including the neuropsychologist, who had evaluated Carla, plus all the therapy notes showing her progress. The judge spent 2 hours reviewing everything while Carla's parents sat in the front row of the courtroom. Their lawyer argued that brain injury patients often seem competent, but make poor choices. Brooks showed the judge video of Carla clearly stating her wishes and answering complex questions about her care. The judge ruled that Carla had the right to choose her treatment location and denied the injunction. Wednesday night, around 11, Carla's mother came to the hospital alone. I was sleeping in the chair next to Carla's bed when she walked in. She asked if she could have a few minutes with her daughter. Carla woke up and nodded. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed and started crying. She talked about growing up poor and marrying Carla's father for security, not love. She said she wanted Carla to have everything she never had, including a husband who could provide properly. Carla held her mother's hand and listened. Then she told her mother she had chosen love over money and would keep choosing it. Her mother kissed her forehead and left without saying anything else. Thursday morning, the ambulance arrived at 10. I rode with Carla while her parents followed in their Mercedes. The new rehab center was 40 miles away in a different county. When we arrived, the intake nurse told Carla's parents that visiting hours were from 2 to 4 in the afternoon and 7 to 8 in the evening with no exceptions. Her father tried to name-drop some doctors he knew, but the nurse just smiled and handed him a visitor's badge. The facility didn't have any wings named after donors. Over the next 3 weeks, Carla made more progress than she had in 2 months at Whitmore. She worked on memory exercises every morning and physical therapy every afternoon. She remembered our first date at the bowling alley where I dropped the ball on my foot. She remembered the night I proposed with a twist tie from a bread bag because I couldn't afford a ring yet. She remembered choosing me. Brooks started filing paperwork with the state medical board the next week, documenting everything that happened at Whitmore Medical with dates and names and witness statements. He sent copies of the visitor logs showing how many times they turned me away, the emails from Valerie Palmer about the access restrictions, and statements from 3 nurses who felt uncomfortable with what they were told to do. The board sent a letter saying they'd opened an official investigation and would be interviewing staff at Whitmore over the next month. Brooks said other families started calling him after word got out, families who dealt with similar situations where donors got special treatment that hurt patients. One woman said her dad's biggest donor got to override her mother's medical decisions just because they gave money for a new cardiac unit. Another family said their teenage son was kept away from his sister after she had a skiing accident because her trust fund was controlled by grandparents who hated the parents' divorce. Brooks added all their stories to the complaint file. Meanwhile, at the rehab center, Carla's parents called asking to visit, and the intake coordinator told them they'd need to schedule it through me since I was listed as primary contact. Her mother called me directly for the first time in months, her voice tight and controlled, asking if they could see their daughter. Carla and I talked about it that night in her room, and she said she'd see them, but only if there were clear rules about what they could and couldn't talk about. No mentions of James, no comments about our finances, no suggestions about where she should live after discharge. The meeting got scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the common room with a social worker present. When they arrived, her mother wore a black suit, like she was going to a business meeting, and her father had his usual stern expression. They sat across from us at a round table while the social worker took notes. Her mother kept reaching for Carla's hand, but pulling back, and her father cleared his throat every few minutes without saying anything. Carla told them about her physical therapy progress and how she was walking better each day, and they nodded and smiled tightly. Her mother started to say something about a specialist she knew in Switzerland, but stopped herself and changed the subject to the weather. The whole hour felt like walking on glass, everyone being careful not to break anything. 2 days later, I got a call from the billing department saying Carla's parents had stopped paying for the private room upgrade and some specialized therapy sessions that insurance didn't cover. The bills added up to $12,000 already, with more coming. I called Brooks in a panic, and he came to the facility that afternoon with his laptop and a stack of insurance forms. We spent 4 hours going through my work insurance policy line by line, finding coverage I didn't know existed for traumatic brain injury rehabilitation. He helped me file appeals for the denied claims and found a state program that covered therapy for accident victims. It took 3 weeks of phone calls and paperwork, but we got most of it covered without needing her parents' money. The relief felt huge, proving we could handle this ourselves. Then a courier showed up at the rehab center with a thick envelope from James's lawyer. Inside was a 3-page letter where James admitted he shouldn't have gone along with the plan to pretend to be Carla's husband. He wrote about how her parents contacted him 2 days after the accident, coaching him on what to say and promising their support if he helped them. The letter included printed emails where her mother literally gave him scripts about their supposed relationship, telling him to mention a trip to Martha's Vineyard that never happened and a proposal at her father's country club. Her father's emails talked about keeping me away until Carla formed new memories with James instead. Brooks made copies of everything and added it to our documentation file, saying this was exactly the evidence the medical board needed. 6 weeks into their investigation, the medical board released their preliminary findings, and the local news picked up the story. They found serious ethical violations at Whitmore Medical, including letting donors influence medical care, restricting legal spouses from visiting, and failing to advocate for patient rights. The board mandated new policies about donor influence, required all staff to take ethics training, and put the hospital on probation for 2 years. It wasn't everything we wanted, but it was something real. Carla got approved for outpatient therapy after 2 months at the rehab center, and we found a transitional care apartment 10 minutes from our place. It had grab bars in the bathroom and wide doorways for her walker, and Medicare covered most of the rent for 6 months. I moved in with her, sleeping on a pull-out couch and helping with her exercises every morning and night. We worked on balance exercises in the living room and memory games at the kitchen table. She had to take 8 different medications at specific times, so I set up a whole system with alarms and pill organizers. Some nights she'd get frustrated when she couldn't remember something or when her legs wouldn't cooperate, and I'd hold her while she cried. Other nights we'd watch old movies and she'd suddenly remember watching them before, and we'd both get excited about that little victory. Her parents called asking if we'd try family therapy to work on the relationship, and Carla thought about it for a week before agreeing. She insisted on finding a therapist who had no connection to their country club or social circle, someone who wouldn't be influenced by their reputation. We found Dr. Walton, who worked at a community mental health center and had experience with family trauma. The first session was brutal, with years of control issues coming out all at once. Her mother kept trying to explain how everything was for Carla's own good, and her father sat silent with his arms crossed. Carla talked about feeling suffocated her whole life, never being allowed to make her own choices. Dr. Walton had to stop the session twice when voices got too loud, but we kept going back each week, slowly peeling back layers of dysfunction. Around that time, my boss saw a news story about the medical board findings at Whitmore, and he called me into his office the next morning. He apologized for doubting me when I needed time off, said he didn't realize what I was dealing with. Some co-workers came up to say they were sorry for the gossip and assumptions. Things got better, but not back to normal since some people still acted weird around me. I focused on keeping my job stable for Carla's sake, working extra shifts when I could to build up savings. Carla's memory kept improving week by week, though the doctors said some gaps would probably stay permanent. She remembered our anniversary date and suggested we renew our vows once she was stronger, maybe in 6 months, when she could walk without the walker. She didn't mention inviting her parents, and neither did I. During one family therapy session, her mother finally opened up about her own childhood, growing up poor with 6 siblings, and marrying Carla's father because he offered security. She admitted she never loved him the way she should have, that she picked money over feelings and regretted it. She said she pushed Carla toward James because she wanted her to have the comfortable life she'd chosen, not realizing Carla wanted something different. Dr. Walton asked if she understood how that projection hurt Carla, and her mother started crying for the first time I'd ever seen. Her father shifted in his chair and cleared his throat, looking at me directly for what felt like the first time ever. He said I represented everything he'd failed at as a father, that seeing me with Carla meant he couldn't provide for her the way he wanted to. Dr. Walton nodded and asked him to explain more, but he just kept talking about how he'd worked his whole life to give Carla options, and I'd taken them away. Carla squeezed my hand and told him she'd chosen me because I let her choose, not because I gave her things. The session ended with her parents walking out quietly, her mother still wiping her eyes. Over the next few weeks, we kept going to therapy, while Carla continued her physical recovery at the rehab center. She was getting stronger every day, walking longer distances with just a cane now instead of the walker. The occupational therapist taught her new ways to manage daily tasks, and I watched every session, taking notes on how to help at home. 3 months after she'd entered the facility, the doctors cleared her to come home. I spent a whole weekend installing grab bars in our bathroom, moving furniture to create wider paths, and setting up a medication station in the kitchen. Her parents called and offered to pay for us to move somewhere bigger with better accessibility features. Carla thanked them but said no, that she wanted to go back to our place, our real home. I picked her up on a Tuesday morning with all her things packed in boxes. She held my hand the entire drive, looking out the window at familiar streets she hadn't seen in months. When we pulled up to our building, she started crying before we even got out of the car. I helped her up the stairs slowly, one step at a time, her hand gripping the railing while I supported her other side. She stopped at our door and ran her fingers over the apartment number before I unlocked it. The moment we stepped inside, she walked straight to the kitchen and touched the counter where we used to eat breakfast. She opened every cabinet, checking that her favorite mug was still there, that nothing had changed. In the living room, she found our photo album on the coffee table and sat down immediately, flipping through pages of our trips and celebrations. She cried when she saw the pictures from our courthouse wedding, touching my face in the photos. I made her favorite pasta that night, and we ate on the couch like we always used to. She fell asleep against my shoulder while we watched TV, and I carried her to bed for the first time since the accident. The next morning, we started our new routine with her medications at 7, exercises at 8, and breakfast at 9. I'd changed my work schedule to start later so I could drive her to appointments 3 times a week. During the drives, we'd talk about everything and nothing, sometimes just holding hands in comfortable silence. 2 weeks after she came home, her parents called asking if they could visit. They'd never been to our apartment in the 5 years we'd been married, always insisting we come to their house instead. Carla thought about it for a day before agreeing, but only for an hour on Saturday afternoon. I cleaned everything twice while Carla laughed at my nervousness. When they arrived, her mother stood in our doorway, looking around at our small space with obvious surprise. Her father had to duck slightly under the doorframe and seemed unsure where to sit. They chose the couch while Carla and I sat in our mismatched chairs across from them. Her mother kept glancing around, taking in our secondhand furniture and the photos covering every surface. She mentioned how happy we looked in all the pictures, sounding genuinely surprised that we could be so content with so little. Her father mostly stayed quiet, sipping the coffee I'd made and nodding occasionally. When they left, her mother hugged Carla carefully and whispered something I couldn't hear. 6 months after the accident, Carla felt ready to go back to work. Her boss had kept her position open and offered to let her start with just 2 days a week. They moved her desk closer to the bathroom and got her a special chair with better back support. Her first day back, I dropped her off and waited in the parking lot for an hour, just in case she needed me. She texted me at lunch that everything was going well, that her coworkers had decorated her desk with welcome back signs. By the end of the month, she was working 3 days and feeling proud of contributing again. Around that time, Brooks called to say Whitmore Medical wanted to settle the lawsuit. The offer wasn't life-changing money, but it would cover all our legal fees and the medical bills insurance hadn't touched. More importantly, they agreed to implement new policies about donor influence and staff training on patient rights. We signed the papers in Brooks's office, Carla's hand steady as she wrote her name. After that, things with her parents slowly shifted into something different. We started having dinner with them once a month at a neutral restaurant, everyone carefully avoiding topics that might cause arguments. It wasn't the close relationship they'd had before, but at least it was honest now, without the manipulation and control. Her mother would ask about Carla's therapy progress and actually listen to the answers. Her father would talk about work and golf, safe subjects that didn't touch old wounds. One evening, Carla got a wedding invitation in the mail from someone in her parents' social circle. James was getting married to a woman named Ashley, whose family owned several hotels. Carla stared at the invitation for a long time before showing it to me. She said she felt relieved, like dodging a bullet she hadn't even seen coming. We sent a card with our best wishes and a small gift from their registry. Her parents went to the wedding and her mother called afterward to say it was lovely, though she sounded subdued. When our anniversary came around, Carla suggested we go back to the courthouse where we'd gotten married. She couldn't remember the ceremony clearly because of her memory gaps, and she wanted to do it again properly. We dressed up in our best clothes, nothing fancy but nicer than what we'd worn the first time. The same judge who'd married us was still there and recognized us, smiling when we explained why we'd come back. We stood in the same spot, holding hands while he read the vows again. This time, Carla's eyes stayed focused on mine the whole time, fully present and choosing me with complete awareness. The judge smiled and pronounced us married again, and Carla squeezed my hands so tight I thought she might break them. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, and she stopped on the steps to look at me like she was seeing me for the first time in months. The next few weeks brought new challenges as Carla started having bad days where her memory would slip or she'd get confused about simple things. One morning, she couldn't remember how to use the coffee maker and just stood there staring at it until I came to help. She found a support group that met every Tuesday at the community center, and I'd drive her there and wait in the parking lot reading magazines. After the third meeting, she came out with 2 other women who'd had similar injuries, and they were actually laughing about something. I started going to the family support meetings on Thursdays, where they taught us how to handle the frustration and confusion our loved ones were experiencing. The facilitator showed us exercises to help with memory and gave us tips about keeping routines simple and consistent. 3 months later, Carla's mother called to tell us they were setting up a scholarship fund at the rehab center for patients who couldn't afford treatment. She didn't apologize directly, but said they wanted something good to come from all this mess. Carla listened on speakerphone and thanked them without getting emotional, just accepting it as a step forward. The fund would cover 10 patients a year, and they named it after Carla's grandmother, who'd apparently had her own struggles with controlling parents. We started having real conversations about what came next, something we'd been too scared to do during all the chaos. Carla said she wanted to help other patients who were dealing with family interference or confusion about their care. She contacted the rehab center about volunteering, and they were thrilled to have someone who understood what the patients were going through. Every Wednesday, she'd spend 4 hours there, sitting with new patients and helping them understand their rights and options. One afternoon, Brooks called to say the medical board's final report was going public the next day. The report detailed 17 violations at Whitmore Medical related to donor influence and patient rights, and they were requiring major policy changes. 3 nurses who'd been involved sent letters through Brooks, apologizing for their role and explaining the pressure they'd been under. We read the letters together at our kitchen table, and Carla said she was glad they'd spoken up even if it was late. The report made the local news, and suddenly people at the grocery store were recognizing us and wanting to share their own hospital horror stories. Things with Carla's parents found a strange new balance where we'd meet for lunch once a month at this Italian place downtown. They'd ask about her therapy and actually listen when she explained her progress and setbacks. Her dad would talk about golf tournaments, and her mom would mention charity events, but they never pushed Carla to attend or get involved. Sometimes there'd be an awkward silence when someone mentioned James or the old country club crowd, but we'd just change the subject and move on. The 1-year anniversary of the accident came faster than expected, and Carla had made incredible progress, even though she still had rough patches. Some days, she'd lose words mid-sentence or forget appointments, but she'd developed systems to work around it. She kept a detailed calendar on her phone with alerts for everything and had sticky notes all over our apartment with reminders. Her boss let her work from home 3 days a week, which helped when she was having foggy days. We decided to throw a small party for everyone who'd helped us through the worst of it. Valerie showed up first with a bottle of wine and a card signed by other patient advocates she worked with. Brooks arrived with his wife, who we'd never met, and they brought homemade cookies that their kids had decorated. Dr. Burks came straight from the hospital still in her scrubs, apologizing for being late, but saying she wouldn't miss it. Even the nurse who'd first reported the situation to the ethics committee showed up, nervous at first, but relaxing when Carla hugged her and thanked her for her courage. We ordered pizza and sat around our small living room sharing stories and laughing about things that hadn't been funny at the time. Valerie told us about new policies being implemented at hospitals across the state because of our case. As the months went on, life found its own rhythm that was different from before, but still ours. Carla's parents would visit our apartment once a month, and her mother had stopped making comments about our furniture or neighborhood. They'd bring dessert from this fancy bakery, and we'd eat it on our mismatched plates while making small talk about safe topics. Her father had even started asking me about my job and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. The biggest change was how they looked at Carla, not with disappointment or frustration, but with something closer to acceptance. They'd finally learned that love meant letting her make her own choices, even if they didn't understand them. And that's where we'll stop for now. I hope this story left you smiling a little brighter. Stick around and subscribe if you want more of that feeling.